All right, so welcome to our API review. So this time a little bit out of the normal time zone because we have friends in Australia who otherwise would have to come in the middle of the night, so we try to avoid that. I suppose you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So I just opened them in the order in which they are here. Should we maybe do the small one first because the large one tends to fill the rest of the meeting? I don't know, is this the small one or is this a large one?
It's a large one. Maybe worth replaying to what Kathleen asked me before we started streaming as to like why we're doing this, right? We're doing it because our users want it, and because we couldn't innovate as much in Windows Forms .NET Framework, because .NET Framework is part of Windows, and any changes in Windows have extremely high buy in the fear of breaking any existing consumers, because .NET Framework targets Windows XP, maybe Windows 2000, and then every flavor of Windows has a new set of APIs. And naturally, Windows Framework, well, it technically can, but the risk of breaking someone inadvertently is just too great. .NET Core and .NET is not part of Windows. Can be installed as per need basis, right? So once you target say 3.1 and say we deprecate something in .NET 5, we're not breaking consumers immediately, like consumers would have some lag time, so they can rework and change their application if necessary, or they can live with 3.1 forever, although it would go out of support, etc. So we have more opportunities and more freedom in innovating Windows Forms right now in .NET space. And another big thing worth mentioning is that we want Windows Forms to be as closely aligned with current Windows. So if Windows has this API, if Windows provides this UI and UX to Windows users, we want Windows Forms developers and Windows Forms users to have ability to easily utilize these APIs. So these new APIs is about bridging existing gaps. It's like Windows has this API or some other API in Windows Forms vocabulary has this API, but say like this task dialog. And task dialog is an existing control in Windows and has been for many years. We introduced task dialog in .NET 5, but we had to descope some of the APIs dealing with the hyperlink functionality because we couldn't design a usable API, something user could easily discover and understand how to use in the time frame we had. So for more than a year with community, we actually been iterating over it, and I think we got to the stage where the team is happy with the proposal, and the community has been involved. They seem to be reasonably happy with the proposal, right? So that's why we're here.
So looking at the proposal, so my understanding is that the task dialog link is a net new type. So is the click event arcs, and then on the page we just add these members. Is that correct?
Yes. So this is a big complex proposal because we want to cater, and if you scroll down, these an objective. We want to cater for two sets of like users. Users who are hardcore and want to do things sort of the hard way or more C or C++ way, and we need to cater for those, and we want as well cater for the majority of our users who probably don't want to deal with native Win32 APIs as much and prefer us to provide them with a simple API. So we're proposing to add a new type called task dialog link. That would enable functionality for hyperlinks in task dialog. With that, we propose a new type for event arcs, which would be used when the user clicks on the link. And then if you scroll down, we have a few more properties and stuff. We have some usage and sort of examples if you scroll down below.
Yeah, so I think so. The change is basically this property would be new, so they set that, and then they override this thing here on their own page in order to react to that.
Emma, can you up the font? I'm on a small screen. I think folks, if anybody's listening, they might like that too. So if you could up the font,
I can.
1 or 2.
The trick is
great.
to find it again. Here we go.
It's up the top. It looks like my screen is frozen.
Yeah, so I have this problem with my when I stream, and I'm also on Teams. Sometimes the Teams thing stops working for me. So let me just give you the YouTube link. The problem with the YouTube one is that it's delayed, so there is that problem. But paste this into the chat here.
So you want us to watch the YouTube, and how are we going to manage it?
Yeah, just open the YouTube in a browser tab and disable the audio, so you can at least see the screen. But yeah, don't drop out of the Teams call. That would be bad.
What's that? I'm just wanting to.
Well, I suppose everyone can open our issues in the browser as well.
That also works, yeah. I mean, you can also open the issue directly in the browser and look at it.
Yeah, do that because I'm impatient with the delay. So yeah.
That works.
What's GitHub?
The issue number is where is this? It is in the WinForms repo, and it's issue 1199.
You can probably just drop the link in the chat as well.
That would be smart. If I were smart, I would do that. There we go.
You just okay.
And it could be even nicer to drop it also in the YouTube chat, so people can do that there too. So so the way I understand it, so basically we will construct the task dialog, but then they basically have to create their own page. That's the model, right? You basically have to derive from task dialog page. You have to override the hyperlink click thing, and then I suppose you have to put the page into task dialog as well.
Correct. That's sort of the hardcore scenarios, where we put it, or unassisted scenario for the users who want to be as close to that C++ sort of Win32 paradigm. So we don't expect the great deal of users using that way, but we didn't want to close that avenue, because people may be coming from Win32 saying, well, hey, I could do it that way. Like, why do I need to?
I see what you're saying. So you're basically saying that that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it would be basically this code here that you have later in the assisted scenario, where you just basically use the create link method on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the code sample is a bit weird because the page is used before it's declared, but I guess you just have to say task dialog page before, and then you can do the hyperlink 1, hyperlink 2 page or create link.
Well,
so basically
hyperlinks, they kind of, you create hyperlinks on your own. You define what hyperlinks are, and then you add them to the page. So, like, you don't have to create a page before you create hyperlinks.
Well, but they're created by calling
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, yeah, I messed up in the... sorry. I did mess up in the
okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
well, I'm scrolling through this, and let's see. Klaus had another piece of code in here, and I'm trying to figure out. So, are there two proposals, or?
There's one final proposal. The second link that I popped in there is the full proposal. It's directly to the comment that's the proposal that we settled on.
Okay, so this is settled. That's what I was just confirming. Okay. Click here to scroll down to the final proposal. All right, I did that.
That's the one.
Okay. Great. Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah, there's been quite a few iterations on it, so like obviously messed up in my example. Thank you, Emma.
So that makes sense. It's basically the normal WinForms model, right, where you can either handle the event or you can override these on XXX methods, right? So seems fairly straightforward.
I fixed the example.
So I should refresh?
You may, yes. I just moved that page upwards because it does look weird. And
so one
Emma,
question.
you participated in the user study. Like I don't remember whether you remember sort of much from it. How would you feel about this API as a user?
So it makes sense. And what's a little bit odd is that you have a link ID on the task dialog link clicked event arcs.
That's been sort of a bane of discussions. The reason is everyone felt that you may have multiple links on a task dialog, the possibility, but it was imperative to distinguish on which hyperlink you clicked, even though these hyperlinks may have exactly the same text.
Right.
And the only reason to distinguish that is to give some sort of ID, which is unique. And the ID or that href information, so ID is essentially what you normally put a HTTPS : blah, 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 but it doesn't have to be the HTTP concept. And that's the only information the Win32 API would give us back. So when you click on the link, that's what you get. You don't get the text.
Right.
And that's why we called it link ID, because we want to, I guess, decouple ourselves from just being this. It's HTTPS hyperlink or the web hyperlink, because ultimately it can be anything. It can be just a piece of text. It can be an arbitrary URI, like in-app navigation, like app : / or Android : / etc. It can be anything. So that's why we call it link ID.
So that makes sense, but like that almost looks like plumbing. Like, I mean, if you already have a type called task dialog link, quite frankly, I would expect that the handler just gets the instance to the dialog link that was clicked on. And like you already have to manage that somehow, right?
What we get, there is an example to the actual Windows plumbing. If you scroll to your unassisted scenario, there is a bit of that Windows plumbing as to what we get, the notification, how we handle the Windows notification. So what we get is that link ID, so we cannot get, and that's our way to get to the instance of the task dialog link object.
Do you
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just, it looks like we're offering what is a very not WinForms looking thing to me with this callback. Do we have reason to believe that some people want this as opposed to the assisted scenario? I mean, I know you say that you're expecting more people to use the assisted scenario, but my question is just, are we certain that there are users who want the unassisted scenario? Or am I misunderstanding something here?
We don't know, but there may be users who want to do it, say, the hard way.
Yeah.
The thing is, if you don't use our task dialog link object to generate links, there would be no way for you to intercept a click event, and that feels sort of as an arbitrary constraint. Because
so how does that do it with? So what happens when you do it with buttons?
So can you rephrase it?
So, I mean, you're basically saying like if we don't give them this, task dialog link and the link ID and the virtual method, they have no way of doing it in the case where they want to, literally derive from the type. And I'm asking like, what do you do for buttons? Like when somebody clicks OK or cancel, like how would I handle that today in the, unassisted scenario?
Well,
I'm actually better understanding the unassisted scenario, so I'm gonna, after Emma's done, I want to restate what I said.
To come back, Kathleen, to your question, you can generate links by just using the expected notation. Is just less a href equals blah blah. The same sort of HTML style hyperlink stuff. So you can generate that and apply, and the task dialog will render the hyperlink for you. But unless we provide you a way to opt into that plumbing and sort of handle the click event, there would be no way for the user to handle that click. That's why we're creating the opt-in mechanism via an override for you to handle yourself.
Yeah, we can get back to email. What I misunderstood is, I'm afraid I simply overlooked your comments about which was the WinForms SDK code and which was the developer code. And I'm rather comfortable with the developer code. And so it was me being slow on the uptake here. So I am much more comfortable with it. I do have a couple questions, but I've really cut emo off on that. So I would like to get back to what he was trying to say. So in the unassisted scenario, I don't know where the phrases assisted and unassisted is coming from, but we're just going to have a subclass page, and among the other things that may be on the subclass page, we're going to override this on hyperlink, and all that makes sense to me.
Yeah, what I was trying to say is like I tried to understand basically the ignoring hyperlinks. How does the unassisted currently work for task dialog? But like I just looked at the APIs and it seems like you expose the handle and that's it basically. If somebody wants to do something hardcore, they have to just call the Win32 APIs directly themselves, right? There really is no like you don't have virtuals today to intercept like clicks on buttons or stuff like that, which kind of to me indicates that do you really need the virtual that you have here? Because it seems to me like if you really want to do it the hardcore way, then well, at that point you just call the task dialog API directly because it's just one method that you call anyways, right? And then you pass in a bunch of data there.
Well, it's a bit more than that. So the thing is, the way we looked at it, your text of your task dialog, including the hyperlink sort of HTML renderer, can come from, say, a database. So like you may not necessarily control it.
Okay.
So and in that case, task dialog will render hyperlink for you, and the user would be able to click on that hyperlink. But as a developer, you would not have any ability to provide a handler for it. So and in for that case, we allow you to just override them. Well, I come up with terms assisted, unassisted. Assisted has been like Windows Forms assisting you in providing the object model for you, and unassisted is where like you on your own, pretty much.
Yeah, so you're basically saying if I statically know the hyperlinks, then having an object model makes sense because you might as well code it up. But if the actual text containing hyperlinks is not something I know statically, then well, how would I react to a hyperlink, right? And then the idea would be I would basically have to have a generic method that basically just gives me you clicked on this thing, and now do your thing. So now my question is, okay, now let's say I do that. How do I get the? So you're saying you give me the link ID, but what is the like? How do I get the actual text?
You don't, because with links, I think you can actually.
Oh, sorry. By ID you mean the href?
Well, that's what link ID. sorry. I have an example for that as well.
So when you say ID, you really mean whatever the user put in the href attribute, right? Rather than, you know,
I believe so, yeah.
Well, link
opaque
ID, link ID is essentially href.
Okay, that makes more sense to me now. Okay, so that makes sense because now, yeah, basically, yeah, you don't care about the text of the hyperlink, you just care about the target of the hyperlink, right? So yeah,
correct.
Yeah, that case ID is a bit weird as a name. Like I would either
well, it's private, so it's not exposed to the user, but we wanted to decouple from the web with sort of vocabulary. We don't want users to think the only thing can be HTTPS or whatever that web.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like I would just call it something like link target or something, because ID to me kind of implies that there's a mapping, and then you have to basically put the ID in to get the actual thing out or something. But like in your case, it's literally whatever the data was that somebody put in the href. So I would call it probably link target or something, because then it's like, yeah, just use the link target to whatever, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me now. Okay,
I don't have a particular strong feeling about this, as long as it's not, you know, href or something, because we discussed it with him and we weren't quite happy with having it called href or URL or URI for that matter. Although URI probably wouldn't be would convey the essence of it.
So I have a question on what you just said to Emo. Sorry, my camera just kind of got off there. It looks like it's a good in the assisted scenario. It looks like it's a dictionary. Are there two different ID meanings? I mean, so on the assisted scenario, the dictionaries of GUID ID and test dialog link, which made sense to me until what you just said to Emo about the ID being something different. So I'm a little bit overall confused with that. But then in the assisted scenario, you don't store the, maybe you could clarify this a little bit, because in the assisted scenario, it looks like you're not storing the URL at all.
No.
It's super reasonable. I do believe that you have a typo, which is likely to confuse people, so I'm going to be nitpicky on this. So you say hyperlink 1 dot click plus equals, and then you define hyperlink 2, and then you say hyperlink 1 dot click plus equals. So if you want to fix that at your convenience.
It's a typo, yep.
Right. I just think that since this is the proposal, let's just get that right sometime.
Absolutely.
So I guess I have to say I relate to the assisted scenario really well. This is like, as a WinForms developer, this makes sense.
Exactly where we put it.
Yeah. So this is like super sensible to me. The unassisted one, I think makes sense to me, but I'm really lost on the link ID in the unassisted one. I just literally don't care about it. Is that the story, or would I be trying to use it in my React to link? Will you have a comment here? React to link clicks. I also think it would strengthen the proposal if you actually put something there as an example, since you have the example for the developer code for the assisted scenario, and I can look at that and I really understand what you're trying to do. So if you it could be as simple as just saying, what does it look like if I actually just want to call this issue the way you did in Hyperlink 1 in the assisted scenario? That would be, I think that would be a huge help, because I'm not sure how you unwrap the test dialog link clicked event args, even though I think I know what they are from somewhere in here. I believe I've seen what they actually are, but how I would unpack those. I get the link ID, so the link ID then if that's the URL, I guess I just do a get process on whatever the link ID is from the event args. And if it's that simple, that'd be great. And then I would feel like this felt less, it just feels a little complicated right now because I don't understand it sufficiently.
Yeah, 1 second, and that will be there.
Oh, you're going to be that quick about it. Thank you. You've already got my other typo fixed. You are awesome.
He is.
So I just noticed that the way you, in the assisted scenario, the way you compose them is basically by string formatting. Do you think people get that?
That came as a original proposal from our external contributors, and it kind of looks neat.
So I don't disagree with that. Like, I'm not saying it's not neat. I'm just saying like that might be in the realm of too clever for people to figure out, right? Because when they just look at the IntelliSense, I think they will be able to create a link that I can understand because the API is right there. I'm just not sure they understand what they're supposed to do with the return page. Like, I mean, seeing it in code, it makes sense, but I'm wondering how many people get that. Like, it's a bit like some of the X-Link stuff where it's not really obvious how you construct X attribute and X element, but just putting them into the constructor that just takes an object array, or just using the brace syntax. Like, neither of them are like super intuitive. I mean, once you have seen it once or twice, like, it looks neat and it makes sense. But if somebody's brand new to the API, I would not necessarily, like, it wouldn't occur to me probably. Like, I would probably sit there for a while and figure, like, I would think I would have to add this hyperlink to something. Like, there's some collection I have to add it to or something. And yeah, that doesn't make a great deal of sense in your case because, well, it is fundamentally interspersed with text. But yeah, I mean, if you have samples, it's probably good enough because, I mean, but it seems like, if you just put this part here into the samples and saying, here's how you do it, I think it will be pretty obvious to people. But like for somebody in the editor, I don't think they will figure this out. And I say this with 100% confidence in zero data. So.
Yeah.
So, Kathleen, I did fix. Sorry, and before you you jump in, Emo, do you have any suggestions? Like,
no, I don't. That's what I'm saying. I can't come up with it because normally you would expect an object model API to, like, you have to add it to some collection, but in your case that doesn't really make a lot of sense.
We have talked about exposing collections, and if you scroll and go through that long thread, we bounced ideas. It just felt too much of a boilerplate code user would have to do. It's like create a link, add it to a collection, then go and enable hyperlink property, and that felt like excessive.
Yeah.
But I hear what he's saying. As you can see, we've been going since June 19, so we took our time and discussed quite a bit.
I mean, the other alternative you have is just not having the object model at all, right? I mean, you could also have a model where it's just you just put the hyperlinks in text, and then you only have an event that you handle, which basically gives you the hyperlink information that was clicked, right? Basically the link target, and that's the way you do it. That's the only way you do it.
That's unassisted scenario, and like I was actually going hard for it, but the external contributors who driving the champions, who driving this, and the team didn't feel it was WinFormsy enough.
So I agree with that. Like I mean, it is a bit weird, but like, I mean, I'm not sure the end result now is more WinFormsy because you basically now have to understand that you are supposed to put this thing somewhere in text anyway. Right? I mean, you're just shifting a little bit, right? Because if you look at the code, you're still expected to put the hyperlink somewhere in that original text, right? And so that's the fundamental problem here because you're dealing with markup, right? And markup is, if you model markup truthfully as an object model, you end up with something like, XHTML or, HTML or Roslyn, where you have these super complicated object models, right? And so if you just squint and say, screw it, it's HTML-like, and people get what that looks like, and you just have an event that gives you the data, maybe that's fine. I mean, I agree with you that deriving from the task dialog page feels very heavy-handed, but Like imagine instead of having to do that, imagine you just have an event on the dialog page that you can just subscribe to.
That's exactly what my original proposal, but I got
Didn't land.
sort of I got voted down, and that's fine. So like it looks like the majority of people who actually care about this issue, who participated in the discussion, they felt that it didn't feel right. Because like your example with buttons, right? Like you have a button and button has a click event on it. So and you add a button to a page. Whereas with hyperlinks, unfortunately, the underlying Win32 APIs did make it very difficult because the hyperlink you added to a page, but then the page is responsible dispatching the notification for every hyperlink you click.
Right.
So people felt like the hyperlink needs to exhibit the same functionality as say a button, because hyperlink looks like sort of that actionable element. So if I click on a button and the button has a click event, well, I would expect that I have a hyperlink. I click on the hyperlink has a click event which I can handle.
Right.
Rather than a page.
With link labels already.
Yeah. So rather than a page saying, "Hey, user clicked on the link which is on the page," and then like a page gives you that link click event. It just didn't land from the object model. It felt disjointed. That's why we went for the whole model of, okay, let's create a hyperlink object. Let's put a click event on that object. Now we need to add these hyperlinks to the page, but because we didn't want to create a hyperlink, add it to a collection on a page, because like once you add a hyperlink, going and removing it kind of makes no sense. The page is short-lived.
Right.
So exposing a new link or hyperlink collection on the page felt excessive from the user point. It's just extra APIs which carry little value. All the user needs to carry is like, well, hey, I need a hyperlink on the page. And
that makes sense to me. My question
track the hyperlink which you click, that's why we need to get dictionaries. But at the same time, we ended in the position where like, well, okay, now we need to make user aware that, but not just create a hyperlink, you need to add it into your text, as you pointed out. Yeah.
That is the oddity here, but I guess that's something you just can't escape from because it's fundamentally markup. It just depends on what text are you putting in there, I guess.
And that's the second bit. The escaping markup correctly may be a challenge for a lot of users.
That's
it may be, and that's why we created the task dialog link object, which would escape it for you. Well, we do the best we can. Obviously, you can probably come up with some crazy thing which won't work correctly, but if we do our job correctly in the 99.999%, we will escape your hyperlink correctly. So all you have to do is, here's my text, done.
Okay, so then let's just say for the assisted one, we take what you have here as a design and call it good. But then for the unassisted case, I still don't know why you insist on inheriting. Like to me, because that seems fairly heavy-handed, right? Because if you actually have this thing now, you have to do a lot of coding to get to something that used to be 4 lines of code and now is 30 lines of code, right?
So with unassisted scenarios, so if we consider that your text may be coming from a database, as in you as a developer, you don't immediately control it, right? All you know, there may be hyperlink in it, or several for that matter, and all you must react to one another. Say because your database is within your organization domain, there's less danger of being some rogue hyperlink which will take you to some random page. So all you care is user clicked on the link and I may need to make determinations just go this way or go that way. So if the text has the markup, as in that hey, ahref, HTTPS, etc., task dialog will render as a hyperlink, but we would have no way of exposing that to the developer that user clicked the link.
No, I think we're talking about each other. I'm not. I completely buy the scenario, the unassisted one. All I'm saying is that it seems weird that you have to derive and override. Why is that not just an event you can subscribe to directly on the existing task dialog page? Why do I have to derive that type and override a virtual? Because that seems
okay.
fairly heavy-handed for the scenario that I want to do.
Well, and somewhat likewise, if many of these pages are short-lived, and all the user really wants to do here is provide the text and the event, it seems kind of heavy-handed to have to create a new type and then allocate it for a short-lived amount of time, particularly when I know there's been a lot of work in WinForms to try and reduce internal allocations and things. It almost seems like there could be a better model here where the user provides the two pieces of information and they still get the assisted model where everything is, they give the handler, they give the text that they want, and everything's internally handled so they don't have to worry about all these complexities. Or they can manually set it up if they want to go with the unassisted model.
It's a fair comment. We still have that on hyperlink clicked method because it's used in assisted scenario to do the magic, right? So it just kind of from that it felt, well, okay, we already have the method, so we can make it protected and available for an override. So in event you don't want to use our object model, like here's a method you can override. Likewise, I agree, like would be allocating a type, but equally would be allocating event handler.
Yeah, to me the allocation argument is not really that strong because fundamentally this is you prompt the user, right? And so like by definition that's not going to be something you do in a tight loop, because if you show like 1,000 of them, you're not going to make friends. So like, we're now talking basically one or two objects that are around for the next, I don't know, 45 to 60 seconds, right? So I think the allocation one, to me, I don't care for the scenario here because you basically, prompt UI and then these things go out of scope immediately. And you're not likely doing this 1,000 times. So it's really more about the ceremony that is involved for the developer, right? Because extending a type or deriving a type and overriding it's not something you can conveniently do inside one method. You now have to create another top level type somewhere, and it's just more work than to just say page hyperlink click plus equals local function, right?
And well, I suppose there's another point to this. We want to avoid users subscribing to wiring up an event in assisted model. So if we make it a public API, right, meaning that you don't have to subclass, it means that the users using assisted model all of a sudden can see that event and subscribe to that, and that would make it very awkward to say.
But what's the problem with that? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that they do more work than they have to, right?
I don't know. Would probably have to explore it. It's just that for assisted, why would you want to see an extra public API and think about it?
Yeah, that's fair. On the other hand, though, I don't necessarily see that as a problem because, frankly, that would allow me to make the decision which model I'm going for, right? How would people today discover the unassisted model? They basically literally have to read the docs, right? There's no way you just accidentally notice that, I can derive from the task dialog page and overwrite this virtual, right? That's not something you can very quickly discover, right? If you see both, there's a hyperlink click event, and then there is I can also create links and they give me back a link. I may make the connection that, I can either do the object model approach or I can just handle any link with a generic handler, right?
Well, that actually may lead you in the wrong way as well, because you may think, I need to create a link and then I need to subscribe to that event, as opposed to subscribing to a hyperlink event.
Yeah, it's possible. Again, I don't have data, right? I'm just saying, looking at the API, that's just, my intuitive reaction to that. I would just say, I'm okay with shipping it as you proposed it. I would just be very surprised if we don't eventually end up with a public event on the task dialog page, because just extending a type is such a pain in the ass, right? Compared to subscribing to an event.
That's fair. Kathleen?
I decided I'm confused. So let me ask a couple of quick questions here. All right. So if I go up to the unassisted, which overrides on hyperlink, those two together, just in the unassisted section. Then we have a public class called task dialog, which is consistent with down below, but the developer code inherits from task dialog page. Is this a typo, or have I completely lost the train here? So does that make sense? Does my question even make sense? So I thought the unassisted was sort of self-contained, and that my initial naive look at this, I had misread it. And so the developer code for the unassisted, I thought you were inheriting from task dialog, which you're not doing. You're inheriting from task dialog page. And that's when I realized I completely lost I lost the plot in here.
Okay, so the whole object model in Windows Forms for task dialog is that task dialog acts as entry point and sort of a container for intercepting and dealing with Win32 stuff, like notifications and else. But ultimately, what user sees on the screen at any given time, because task dialog, you can make out ultimately like multi-page and sort of wizard-like stuff, which is not really designed for. So what user sees as a page. So on the page, user has like a caption, the heading, the text, buttons, hyperlinks, etc. So user deals with the page. Okay. And because hyperlink belong to a page, right? That's part of your text. You need to subscribe or subclass the page on which you handle hyperlink click, because hyperlink belongs to a page.
Got it. Okay, I think I've caught up now. I apologize for kind of losing the track there. That's cool. I actually think that splitting these up with the code was what threw me off. I don't know if that's something that you want to take a look at just in the structure of the proposal or not. But since task dialog page, which I now understand, it doesn't appear with the until the assisted scenario. It left out a big important piece of the unassisted scenario that appeared first. So my first question, got that straight.
Just to finish up on this, if you look at the task dialog, when we in that notification we actually bound page is sort of the page on which we invoke that. So that's what I may have missed.
So I see that now, but I don't really understand as I'm reading this. Okay. I haven't seen the test dialog page yet, so that threw me off. That's the first thing. And second thing, I have three things. And the second thing is I want a confirmation that on the unassisted scenario, the great sample you added, which the console write line, user clicked on e.link ID. My question is, would that print user clicked on ID? And with the page text that we were given, or have I missed something else there? Does the link ID come from the page text anchor href, or does it come from something else?
It would be href.
The actual text would be user with this sample. The actual text would be user clicked on ID.
Correct. That's what Emma proposed to call link target, I believe.
Yep.
All right. Okay. So it might help if somehow in docs sometimes just put a comment after it that's exactly what was printed. That might also help folks digest this. I'm sorry I'm being kind of slow on some of this.
Oh, and then cool. That's a great suggestion.
I would also like to say that one of the things that I like about the assisted scenario is something that I guess it seems really trivial, but there's no HTML there, and the unassisted scenario appears to rely on having HTML in a WinForms form dialog thing. And oh, you're so nice. That's perfect. Thank you for that update. And if anyone's watching the live stream and you don't also have the GitHub open, that's too bad because he's just right on top of these changes I'm talking about. So I have to say I haven't done any user studies. I don't know if Olia's on or not. You know, I've never done user studies on WinForms, and you know, it's been a while since I've done it. But it just looks weird as heck to me to be seeing HTML in a WinForms.
That's
somebody else may disagree with that.
That's precisely why we went for the object model of introducing task dialog link, because we want to abstract that HTML stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's another reason why we went for, say, link idea, which, as Emma pointed, may be a bit confusing, to divorce ourselves or divorce the users from thinking that it has to be HTML and it has to be href and it has to be HTTPS or whatever else, sort of web stuff. That's why I put in a sample my link ID, because it can be arbitrary stuff.
I like that you did that. So one last thing on that is that given that the on hyperlink clicked, do we need the word hyper in there? Could on link clicked, because I mean we're using the word link here, and so you know that it's hard to get around that. But we're not, hyperlink to me has an implication of HTML, and maybe it's just me, but I'm not sure about the addition of hyper in there.
I see. So you would just remove hyper and just call it link task dialog. Right.
Yeah, if we can get away with it, can we just remove the word hyper every place here? Unless it's giving value to somebody that I'm not seeing.
On link clicked?
Yeah, I think that's actually not a bad idea, because I mean,
the
virtual right now is the only place where you use the word hyper. Well,
no, we have another property on the page, enable hyperlinks, which sort of relates to how it's called in Win32, but we can call it enable links. Would that?
Yeah, I'd like you to touch base with Olia on that, and you know, see if she thinks it's worth asking a couple of users for some feedback on that. But to me, hyper doesn't belong any place in here. But that's just kind of like one old WinForms users talking. That's not like anything more than that. But as somebody who used, you know, had a decade in WinForms, hyper just feels weird in here.
Cool. It's a totally valid comment.
For the unassisted scenario, given the conversation that was just had about hyperlinks, rather than having the users explicitly do page.text equals and then dealing with escaping, because, for example, even in the sample here, the escaping of the quotes is incorrect. Should we expose a static format method that works just like string format, but takes, for example, the ID and the exposed text, just to simplify that and potentially allow it to be changed in the future if it ever needed to be?
Well, that's why we created a task dialog link object, so users don't have to deal with this. The unassisted scenario is, again, like your text is coming from somewhere. As a developer, you don't immediately deal with it. Because as a developer, I fully agree that a madness, and I failed as well, escaping it. Thanks for pointing. So this scenario is like we expect is like, well, my text comes from database. I expect the database to already have the correctly escaped it.
So the database is expected to have already correctly escaped it to be.
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
A proper HTML anchor.
Yeah. Well, that's why we call it unassisted. It's like, well, if you want to do it the hard way, you have to own it.
Right.
Right.
I'm just wondering if it actually has to be like unassisted to the level that you're expected to even do the escaping correctly, considering that sometimes there can be security considerations or other things, and maybe having a method that takes the two parts and does the formatting without having to go through the whole process. Because you could equally imagine that the database doesn't actually have it as a HTML anchor, but rather as the ID and the target URL.
In that case,
Yeah,
I would argue that you should use assisted scenario because you have your bits of information which you can feed into through the prop object model.
Yeah, yeah. So Tanner, why would you want to use? Why would you not use the assisted scenario in that?
Because it requires additional work and allocations and things that may not be worthwhile. It's basically a lot of ceremony where versus simply just calling a method that provides the 2 bits of detail that you actually need.
So you're more or less looking for being able to have the equivalent. Well, not really. Be a little different. So you're looking at it. There's a page.create link in the assisted scenario, something to the effect in the unassisted scenario of, I'm going to give it a bad name right now for clarity, of create anchor and take the href and take the href and the text. If Tanner, why would it be hard if somebody wanted that? Excuse me. To do any cleansing that they were going to do, and then go into the text and just shove it into the href where my link ID exists and link. Are you simply worried about them being able to get the escaping right?
Yeah, escaping's the root of all evil. Everybody gets escaping wrong, whether you're in SQL or HTML or regex.
Only the first 10 times.
No, you get it wrong every time, which is even why C#'s discussing adding yet another syntax for strings to avoid the string quote escaping problem.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, Tanner. I was joking about, I didn't mean just the first 10 strings you ever saw. I meant you get it wrong on the string and then you fix it, except you didn't fix it everywhere and you do it again. So I was just teasing about that.
So to me, it feels like a bit like misplaced.
I guess I feel like if you're using this anchor, then you ought to know how to escape. But I guess I'm being brutal in that.
I'd imagine that the first thing that I would do in WinForms when I had this would be I would write myself a general purpose task dialog link that's just reusable. And I would write a helper function, basically a factory function that takes the 2 parts that you actually care about, and I'd be done with it. I never have to deal with the having to inherit from the type or anything ever again. Okay,
but why is this special? Every place else you've ever created an anchor in .NET, you've had this problem. If we need an answer to this, why isn't it a helper library that's across the entire BCL and useful anywhere that you are creating an anchor?
I mean, we kind of do have it, but it's specific to the format, right? I mean, the idiomatic way these things are usually done is that you have something like a string builder or a writer, where you have a method like write link or something that takes 2 arguments and it just formats it for you. But we don't really have that because we don't really have HTML support in the BCL, right? Like the only thing we have is XML, right? And so there's an XML writer that basically behaves the way you want. And we have it for JSON because the same thing there. There's a JSON writer API that takes, when you want to write a property, it takes the name and the value, right? And and it does the escaping for you. But like I don't know that a writer is necessarily easier though, because then at the end of the day, like you still have to call like toString or something to get the final text out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not like
So,
a single function, right? Because you may have 500 hyperlinks in your text, right? And so you would have to like concatenate the strings then if you don't have a writer. So that also seems like the wrong API abstraction.
to some degree, I was trying to just make a point that I'm not sure that taking this one usage, which for this case actually will always be, a hyperlink, but just in this one case, making a special accommodation for it. Although, as I said those words, I realize there may be a reason to do it, but it's not the reason you gave, Tanner. It's a different reason. And that is that if I look at this code, you could cause some chaos by putting 2 anchors in there.
How so?
To me, it feels sort of misplaced responsibility, to be honest. Like if you're choosing that unassisted scenario, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you need to escape. Well, you might as well write your own escaping thing and just feed the string into the.
Yeah, but
I don't even think it. Go ahead, Kathleen.
But, okay, just to be clear, let me ask just this question, Igor. I put 3 anchors in there. Okay, does it work the way I expect it to?
You will have 3 hyperlinks on which
and
user can click.
I will correctly get the link ID for each one.
Correct.
Then I have to say that I think we should make the user escape it correctly, because to do what Tanner's suggesting, actually, for the text, instead of text, if you had a thing that took a hyperlink, that took the href in the text, then you wouldn't be able to have the text on the page contain 18 hyperlinks and live happily ever after, which if we say, you know what, you can go ahead and escape it yourself, then you would be able to do as many hyperlinks as you wanted, and then straighten it all out in the onlink clicked override.
Two parts here. One, I think we could, because you're essentially exposing the API that works like string format, where you'd have text, curly brace, 0, close curly brace, and it would work just like, and it would take a params of tuples, where the tuples are the ID and the target. And then it just becomes the same as any string format algorithm, with handling for each parameter to replace it. But I think the more important part is I don't think this is what I'm suggesting is also just for the unassisted scenario. It's also somewhat for the assisted scenario, in that it avoids the ceremony of having to go and deal with task dialog link and everything else, when most of the time, even if you have 2 parts, what you're going to have is, if you've got the 2 parts, you have your href and you have your link ID and you have the event that you want to execute. And having to go through the ceremony of, at a minimum, create task dialog link, set the text, set the ID, and assign the event handler, versus some factory method that does all of that for you. It also assists in that assisted scenario, in that you don't have to worry about doing all of this, because from what I see, there's no constructor here that simplifies that process. And so you've got all the ceremony just to do this one thing, and you're going to end up writing 4 or 5 lines of code in something that realistically could and should be 1 line.
Well, you don't. If you want to click events, you're going to have 2 lines of code. There's just no way around that. So I don't see how you're getting 4 or 5 lines of code here. I see 2 lines of code.
Well, there's no public constructor that takes the text and the href that I see, and
correct. And that's done on purpose. So like your hyperlink is just what user sees is just a text, and then when the user clicks on that text, you can react. Because if you have multiple links sharing the same text, some users felt that there may be different ways of handling that for whatever reason. So that's why we're giving you the click event, and then you can, or you clicked on that link, you do this. You clicked on the same link with the same text, but it's different link, like you do something else.
Yeah.
That's precisely why we don't allow setting this ID and that we auto-generate it and don't expose it to the users.
Yeah.
But I totally hear what you're saying, Tanner, and essentially, like that was my initial proposal. Like that's something I personally felt would be better. But the trouble is the web button and any other control in Windows Forms typically has a click event, and control itself is responsible for handling any actions on it. Whereas with hyperlinks in the task dialog, hyperlinks belong to a page, and page reacts to clicks. So a lot of comments we got that it feels very disconnected. Like I have a hyperlink, which as a user or developer I treat as an object, but the click event doesn't belong to a hyperlink on which I clicked. It belongs to a page on which that hyperlink exists. And like we could have avoided that, like, and had that basically you just handle that task dialog page link click event, and then you don't have all these ceremonies. But the feedback we got from users, it felt disjointed for them. Like in Windows.
I mean, I get the feedback, but I will say that the thing that Tanner just raised about the constructor is also a real thing, right? Like it's not a very WinFormsy API to have a factory method, right? That's also, I mean, I know why you did it, because you need to keep track of these instances and link them to some artificial IDs that you maintain in the background. But like, I'm not sure that, if I were to use the original API, I would probably give you the same feedback the users are given. But I think the problem is when you look at both solutions, like it seems one of them has a lot fewer moving pieces than the other, and the other still doesn't really feel WinFormsy all up, right? So that's why I'm kind of, I know why you designed what you did, and it makes sense. I'm just not sure that it's worth it, in a sense.
Is this factory method going to be toolable? Are we going to be able to do that from a properties dialog? Looks like the answer is yes. I just want to confirm that.
No, we still don't have support for the task dialog in the design at all. We don't know whether it would be coming at all.
That would be an interesting thing, right? Because that's probably the most WinFormsy way of building this dialog, is to just drag and drop a thing in the tray and then just tweaking the shit out of that, right? That's probably how people would want to do that.
And that's precisely why we need to expose these click events, because you construct a task dialog link, and on this you have the click event. So designer generates all the plumbing and ceremony around that.
I mean, sort of, right? I mean, you can also just take the position and say, screw it, the text is a property, right? You put in your hrefs by hand, like you do, when you're edit HTML by hand, and you just have one click handler one link click handler on the page or even the dialog, and that just gives you whatever target you clicked, right? Which is basically the original design, right? Like, I mean, there would not be, like, you wouldn't give people necessarily the feature that they can, design basically the links. But I think you will have this problem regardless, because as you already said, the problem is the links are not an object model concept, because fundamentally they have to occur in text, right? And so the thing is, somebody has to decide, like, at this part of my sentence I want a hyperlink, and in this part of my sentence I want a hyperlink, right? So that's, and the control in WinForms for this will be a text box, right? Like, I mean, what else would we going to do there, right? And then it just becomes the question of, like, well, do you want to have, per hyperlink one object and one independent click handler, or could you live with one where you just switch? And that's kind of where I'm saying I understand the feedback, but also it just seems like have more moving pieces with not a lot of benefit.
Right. Well,
So,
and I could also imagine that you support the efficient model of having the task dialog page track the hyperlink and the other bits while simultaneously allowing the user to construct, objects and pass them in, and internally the dialog page just puts them into that page. But the user also has the option to go and say, I just want to use that directly. And then you kind of have this nice model where the user gets to pick, do I want the thing that's how it actually works, and I don't have the overhead of task dialog link.
I mean, honestly, like I said before, like to me, the efficiency argument doesn't really hold any water, right? Because you can realistically only have one dialog active at any given point in time. So it's not like a user control that is embedded in a form where you may have hundreds of them. You can have one dialog page active because it's a modal dialog, right? And so
well, unless you go and tweak the settings and make it non-modal because you want to have multiple active.
No, you can't. It's Win32. It's modal. It runs
except you can always go and tweak that.
Well,
and if you're going down that road, like you're on your own completely, right?
and
you know what you're doing.
In that case, why don't you just use the Win32 API directly? I'm gonna have to go in just a minute. So if I can just super quickly summarize my thoughts on this, I don't care if there's a helper method. My.dialog.page.build anchor, and it takes an href and a text. If that feels like something that's helpful to get around, that would solve it completely solve the escaping problem, and then leave everything else just the same, and you would simply put you're using an interpolated string anyway, you just put in a curly that said, my.dialog page static method make HTML, make anchor, blah, blah, in this case, my link ID, link, and then just be done with that problem. I think that problem can be solved that simply. If we think it's an actual problem, it could also be solved in the future that simply, if we take that. I really do think that having the hyperlinks be the clicked thing is like the WinForms thing to do, and it is completely not obvious to me why it wouldn't be just as easy to tool the factory methods, even though you're correct, it's not standard. I think it'd be very easy to tool. If that is hard to tool, then I think it's kind of, then I have concerns about both of them, because I think that it is the natural thing to have the click event happen on the hyperlink, which means that you need to track it, which means you need to do something, and what you're doing seems fairly reasonable on that. I think there's so many cases that would be confusing that the user would think they should be able to do, including, I don't know, the code that winds up on that on-link clicked event is going to be horrible if you have 18 links. And it's completely simple if you have each link being its own click event. And if we say there should never be, in reality, more than X links, maybe that's not such a big deal. And I'm sorry to kind of have to kind of hijack that for a second to give that feedback. I basically like what this is, except the word hyper. And I think that we can figure out if escaping is actually a problem. If it is actually a problem, it's solvable in and of itself with the same helper method that could maybe be used elsewhere, but we don't do that because HTML isn't embedded into the BCL. So yeah, that's where I stand.
So how about this? So it seems like we kind of gave a lot of feedback. How about we mark this as just needs work, and then Igor can talk back with the contributor and see whether they want to tweak the design or not. Like, I am personally okay with the original design module with a few tweaks that we suggested, but I have to say I share the gut feel that the object model seems a little bit odd, and yeah, I can't figure out how we would tool that in the designer, because I don't think the designer supports factory methods easily. I mean, we can probably write a handwritten designer for this, but then that might be also more work than we want to sign up for. So it seems to me like, you want to You want to at least, I think, give the feedback back to them and then see whether there's some tweaks that result from that. But if you come back in 5 days and say, no, they really like the original design, I'm also okay with approving that. With the caveats, of course, that we just talked about.
Well, I can tell you, Klaus was a big contributor of that, and factory method is his.
Yeah. So if we don't use the factory method, couldn't we use a constructor that put in an empty item into the dictionary with a empty string link? An empty string text into the dictionary, and then allow that to have the text set. That would be consistent with the way most WinForms work.
But how do you get to the dictionary?
We would have to expose we would have to expose collection, and meaning that the users would have to write at least one more line of code.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and we don't want the user to be writing that code. We do.
Yeah,
if we can't tool it, we have a really big problem.
Yeah, well, I think that's like factory method can be done at the designer.
Yeah, I don't know why it couldn't be, but somebody who works on the designer needs to answer that. Igor, that would be like somebody you know.
Well, Mary definitely knows.
Yeah. So you guys have friends.
What would the extra line of code the user has to write be?
Page.links.add hyperlink 1.
Yeah, you would have to somehow parent the objects to the other page, right? So that somebody can basically walk the objects and build a dictionary, right?
Isn't that how most of the collection types in WinForms already work?
Yeah, yes, that is how most of the stuff works, and that's also why most of the stuff is designer-based, so that you don't have to write that code because it's boilerplate.
You could even imagine that the task dialog constructor took a string ID defaulting to null. If it's null, it auto-generates from GUID.new GUID, and otherwise it uses whatever the user specified.
Yep. No, that's a general usability rule, right? Like, your stuff is proportionally usable to how many how many constructors you have, right? Like, if most of your stuff can't be constructed, it's very hard to use because people can't figure out how to create an instance out of these guys, right? Because they have to somehow know that, oh, I can't new it up. I have to go to this other thing and ask for the thing to be created. Like in your case, the saving grace is that there's only so many types that are prefixed of tasks. So practically speaking, there are only so many things that will try, and one of them will have it. But I am still skeptical that people understand how to compose them. That would be my guess.
Well, and if you wanted to save that line of code, then it's simply you would have both the process of .collection.add, and you'd also have add link, which takes the parameters, and then you wouldn't have to worry about task dialog link at all, which is kind of what I was proposing earlier. So you end up with both patterns, one that the designer can use and one that users can use for the friendliness.
I'm not sure how you avoid the type, because you still have to somehow, whatever method you call to create a link, you still have to say how, where in the text this guy goes, right?
Right, but there already has to be somewhere some kind of text that builds that, and it's with the proposed right now. It's basically string format where it's taking the task dialog link, and there's no reason why that couldn't also be a format method that takes the parts to construct that for you.
Well, it's not really going to string format. It's just calling toString on the object instance, right? So the question is, where would that function that formats it for you go, right? It would be in some other unrelated place, right?
Right. You'd have to have some kind of method which took the root string, specified where the anchors go, and then took the anchors, or the parts of the anchors.
Right.
And that really makes it complicated for the user.
Yeah, the problem is you wouldn't just take the part, right? You would literally have, because like the hyperlinks are interspersed with the normal text, right? So it would look more like a string builder where you say write text and then write link, right? And then, the write link method takes 2 arguments, the target and the text, and write text just takes, a string, and then you call these methods in whatever order makes sense, and then at the end of the day you get a string out of that, right? But
I'm happy to call this like more work required, and I'm happy to work with Tanner to see what Tanner has in mind, and maybe we can iterate it over. Because I fully appreciate we've taken quite a significant amount of time, and we still have 2 more issues to go.
Yeah. So I just posted in a chat what I was basically thinking. You would have, for example, on task dialog page, a static format method that takes a string, takes the text, the visible text, and the ID. And using that, you could put however many you wanted, because that's logically similar to doing what was also already proposed, which is click me link, where me link is a task dialog link. It's just in one you're bypassing, and logically the thing that's doing the formatting for task dialog link could just be a call to x.format.
We want to avoid, and we explicitly done it to user supplying ID, because there may be multiple links, and if these links share the same idea, we would have no way of telling the difference, telling on which link user clicked.
Well, in this case, like in Tanner's proposal, it's not there's an idea, but it's positional, right?
Right. So there's multiple ways you could handle this.
Right?
The simplest of which is that you just take the text and you automatically generate the ID. And the other one is you take both the text and the ID, but if the ID is null, you automatically generate the ID. Otherwise, you take it as it is, and you expect the user to handle the difference if there's 2 that conflict.
All right. Like as I said, I'm happy to work with Tanner offline and come back for the review once we reach.
Yeah. So how about this? Like, I will mark it as needs more work. I'll post in my comments, and then set up another meeting where we can talk about the other issues, because I have to run now. What days would work for you? Right? Our Thursdays wouldn't work for you because that would be your Friday, right?
Well, Fridays. Well, it's Wednesday today, right? Wednesday evening work nice for me. My Thursdays are pretty free.
I mean, like, I can also just book literally the same slot tomorrow again. That also works, right?
No, I'll be out of office.
I see. So then next week then?
Yeah.
All right, then let's do next week again, and then let's bring up the other 2 issues.
Well, next week may not be good because it's public holiday in the States, so literally gives us 1 day of interacting with Tanner, so maybe in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, 2 weeks also works. Okay, then I book it for...
No, 2 weeks would be .NET Conf, so let's do for beginning of March.
So that will be the 3rd then?
3rd for you, yeah, 4th for me.
Yeah, all right, I'll do that.
Thank you.
All right, then I see you in 3 weeks.
Thank you so much for your feedback.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.